On today's show, well, the Padres, they may have dropped that last game against the Brewers, but now they've got another series. They're going to be facing off against the Blue Jays, and I've got a special guest for it, Tyson Shushkewich of Just Baseball Media, among other many places. We're going to be previewing the series, talking about pitching matchups, asking some mean questions about Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and much more. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, April 19th. A fun Friday indeed. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javapeno, Javiipeno. You can get the podcast wherever your podcasts from for sure. And you might be familiar with some of my baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where I write about not just the Padres, but also general baseball weirdness. And speaking of Just Baseball, my guest for today's episode is a fellow collaborator, a fellow staff writer over at Just Baseball. His name's Tyson Shushkewich. I mentioned him at the cold open. You might be familiar with his work. He is here. He is here to thrive and vibe and discuss the Blue Jays because that is his expertise. Tyson, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. And look, here's the thing. The Blue Jays, it's not exactly a team that Padres fans are used to because they are in the American League. I am very happy that Major League Baseball decided, got 162 games in the year. Do you think everyone should play each other at least once? Yeah, that's probably a good idea, right? So congratulations to them just figuring that out in our holy Lord. I think it was 2022 they decided that. But Tyson, we got a lot to get into, so we're going to start with we're going to be starting off with Vlad Jr. Firstly, though, I just want to mention everybody, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150, win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And finally, getting started with this episode, I'm just going to throw it at you, man. The biggest player, the most famous player on the Blue Jays, once upon a time was the same prospect class, I guess is the way I describe it. Number one overall prospect, number two, whatever, with alongside Fernando Tatis Jr. There was great debate between the two. And I'm wondering, Vlad Jr., what's going on? Because it feels like ever since the MVP season, and that's like the most noteworthy player on the Blue Jays, it feels like it's been a little bit up and down, to put it lightly.
Yeah, when you think of Guerrero Jr., you're always just thinking of this elite type of hitter, able to, put one over the fence at any moment. You're thinking of a guy who's just, kind of has that vibe going into the batter's box that he's a tough out. And I think over, the expectations were set pretty high right from the get-go. He was dominating in AA, AAA. He was doing well. He was doing well with the group that he was with, and Kevin Gausman and Bichette. And then when he reached the majors, right, 2019, then he had the 2020 season, which was weird for the Blue Jays because they were playing south of the border for, a good chunk of it. They couldn't go over to Toronto. And then you have a season like 2021 where him and Marcus Semien just exploded, right? You kind of saw the potential that he had. He tied the league lead in home runs with Perez. Like, he was just nailing the ball and was such a, had it not been for Shohei Ohtani and his two-way superstardom, like, he was probably winning the MVP that year. And since then, you've kind of seen the league adjust to him and him kind of not be able to adjust back, right? And when you look over the past couple of seasons, the power's always been there, right? Like, he's always been able to put the ball in play. He's always been able to hit it for hard. But you've always talked about, look behind the scenes, like launch angles, and you talk about being able to put the ball in play with just not where the other team is, right? And when you think about Guerrero Jr., especially just because you have that 2021 season, you know what you can get from him. And Blue Jays fans have just been hoping that guy comes back, because when you think about the Blue Jays, Vladimir, like, he's one of the top guys that comes out of the head, right? Like, you're like, oh, he's going to be a power threat.
That'll be the show cover. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. The shoes, that caused the whole thing. But, but basically you think of him and you think of a power guy, you think of a elite bat hitter, like just being able to put the ball in play. And we haven't seen that since 2021. And that's not to say he hasn't been a great hitter. Like last season was considered a down year for him, and he's still, second on the team in OPS, even though the Blue Jays weren't over the top fantastic down the line. He still had an OPS over 800. He was still hitting 270. But again, when you look at him, then the expectations that are set, you're expecting a guy who can hit 30 plus home runs. He didn't do that last year. You're expecting a guy to hit over 100 RBIs. Again, he was around there, but like it's one of those things that the expectation was set so high that 2021 season that fans are wanting that again. And considering the Blue Jays are one of the only teams that haven't really locked down any of their core starters compared to the rest of the league, him and Bichette are both free agents after next year. It's really a tough conversation, but yeah, it's a weird one. Today he was great on paper if you look at his stats, but he had a couple swings in the box where you're like, what are you doing? Like that is hitting the other. If he was the lefty, he would have got hit on the knee and he was swinging at it, right? Like so. But then again, he hits 100 to 110 mile per hour up the middle and scores one, right? So it's a bit of a weird play, but I think the power is there, and it's just whether or not he can adjust to the opposing pitchers and be able to launch the ball like we've seen him.
Hey, and hopefully he does not adjust to opposing pitchers this weekend for the Padres series. But yeah, I know what you mean. And it's just like when you look at some of the players in the league now, I don't think that this is the most overrated player in the sport, although I imagine he's getting that slander these days. Like, his numbers aren't terrible. He's got a 118 WRC plus. He's got a 346 on base. So while he's not hitting well, he's still drawing walks. But I think a big problem also has been just he needs to be great because he loses a lot with the defensive value, which I think people have been talking about since even when he was good. He's had some issues with the defense. And believe me, Padres fans, we understand being a little bit disappointed in your star or allegedly star first baseman. But yeah, Vladdy, like you mentioned, he's at least been able to hit for power. Like last year, he had 26 home runs. It was weird. It was like one of the more inexplicable seasons I've seen where like he's a great example. I'll put it this way. He's a great example of baseball savant, the StatCast profile, it's good. It's helpful. I'm glad that people use it, but it just doesn't tell the full story. Because when you look at Vladdy, almost every year, 99th percentile hard hit rate, average exit velocity, barrel rate, all that sort of stuff is always up there, but then it just doesn't come fully together. It's possible that this is just a point of youth. He's 25 years old. You know what I mean? So he's still someone I think that the Padres will have to fear. But as of right now, I don't know. It's weird. I have him on my fantasy team. I'm hoping he does well. Hopefully not this weekend. But I am curious. Like you brought up also a great point about how the Blue Jays are one of the teams that haven't locked up their, some of their core starters. You mentioned Bo Bichette. We've got Vladdy, obviously. While the Padres, they've got seemingly everyone that you can lock up. They've tried to lock up at one point, for better or worse. Yeah, just a little bit, you know what I mean? And we're having some issues of our own over here with a certain second baseman who we signed to an 11-year deal. So we'll have to see how that pans out. But yeah, I mean, great points. I don't know. I think that this is just one of those players where it'll happen when no one's like talking about it. You know what I mean? Like that's what's going to happen with this guy. It's going to be 2 years from now, and then that's who he becomes permanently for the rest of his career. I personally think that he's too talented not to figure it out. Bottom line is this. The usual stuff, I think, with a star slugger is still there. But can he adjust? Can he face the right pitchers? We'll have to see. And he will be facing a knuckleball pitcher. So who knows if he could take advantage of that. I feel like people tend to send knuckleballs into the bleachers sometimes if they're not thrown well.
We're accustomed to that from the R.A. Dickey days.
Exactly. Good point. I forgot about him. Incredible guy. Love that dude. I have his book, I think, on knuckleball pitching. Really fascinating stuff. But guys, we're going to be talking about some of the other biggest storylines of this series, some of the other big things to note for the Blue Jays, underrated players, people to keep an eye on, all of that stuff in just one moment. But before we do that, I just want to take a second to talk about our friends over at FanDuel. You heard him at the top of the show. FanDuel is fantastic. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. And in baseball, obviously, you're listening to a baseball podcast, is in full swing. And FanDuel is your place to bet on any and every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from home runs. Maybe you want to bet on over on Vladdy walks or home runs. You want to bet on Tatis stolen bases. Maybe you want to hey, Merrill Madness is in play. You could get it on that action while he's hot. You can do all that stuff on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. I mean, what can I say? What are you waiting for? Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Your team every day, of course. Remember to go check out the show wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow the YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, or my buddy Tyson at Tyson_MLB if you want the best in Blue Jays coverage. But back to that, my friend. Biggest storylines for the Blue Jays. So, look, we talked about Vladdy already. We don't have to spend too much time talking about that. But what is the current perspective? What is the current state of if you put a thermometer and you had to measure the temperature of the Blue Jays fan base, what do you think is the current vibe going on right now?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting vibe. The Blue Jays started the season on the road in 3 different series. I think everyone's aware of kind of how the bats went with the Houston Astros no hitting them and just not getting any offense. And then, they came home last week. They started a series against the Mariners. They took that one. They then started a series against the Rockies. They lost 12-4 and then ended up winning the next 2. And so I think, after this week against the Yankees, they almost got the sweep too, right? They lost it in the 9th there. And unfortunately that just ran out of arms, it looks like. And so I think right now you're seeing a Blue Jays team that wasn't really firing on all cylinders, but was still able to kind of grind out at bats and win some ball games, right? The Mariners and the Rockies haven't had the best starts to the year. And I think there was a couple losses in there, obviously, but with the way the Blue Jays were, they were grinding out at bats. They were utilizing their pitching. Their starters have really kind of come around the 3rd or 4th time through. And you're starting to see a team that's kind of figuring some things out, putting some things together. And one of the things that was really, really bothering the Jays was not getting production from the top of the lineup, especially against starters early, right? They were starting to kind of generate runs and hits and just collectively bringing runners in towards the 5th to 7th inning, kind of that 3rd time through. And the last couple of games, we've seen them kind of get a little bit of a quick jump start, which is good to see. And I think when you look at this team, they're even with the loss that happened on the Wednesday there, you're still seeing a team that's kind of in a good momentum swing. They went, I think, 6-3 at home, and just being able to put a better spin on their record to come in after not hitting the ball well on the road and then go back to the Rogers Center and put forward something strong while their pitching from their starters has also been solid, I think is a good mix of things that you're going to be seeing from this team come in this weekend.
Interesting. And for me, my perspective is that it feels like the Blue Jays are just kind of one of those teams. They were the darlings of the league for a little bit. I mean, we already talked about Vladdy. That was a big part of it. You've got, the big George Springer signing, the big signing of Kevin Gausman. Heck, want to go even further back? They unlocked Robbie Ray, and he won a Cy Young for them. The Blue Jays have definitely been a darling to an extent, but it feels like they've been brushed aside a little bit because you have, the Yankees with our former guy, Juan Soto, and you've got the Orioles, who I just think have the Avengers at this point.
Right.
There's a lot of other storylines, I think, in this division. And then the Rays, who are probably, in my opinion, just going to win the division. I stand by it. They always
find ways.
They find ways whenever nobody's talking about it. So they're still always there. And the Blue Jays are this team where it's we just haven't seen the maximum potential. And you bring up Bichette. It seems like he's been one that's been struggling heavily so far. As of just right now, just to give the numbers, he's hitting .219 with a .286 on base, a .328 slugging percentage, only an .82 WRC plus. How has it been with Bichette so far? Do you think it's going to get better?
Yeah, I think so. At the start of the season, Bo was battling a bit of a neck injury, and he's kind of struggling through the first few games. And then he took a few games off, and then with him, he's very hard on himself. He's a guy I think in the one win the other day, he grounded out to second, and he missed a pitch that he probably could have tattooed into the upper deck, and he came back to the dugout and was slamming his helmet, right? He just holds himself to a high regard. And I think when you look at Bo Bichette, he's like any player. He has hills and he has valleys, and there's peaks and there's lows. And with him, the way that he started this season, obviously, I think it's safe to say that he was bothered in some way. He probably should have sat to start the year, but you don't want to be that guy to start the year. But I think when you look at this team, Bichette is a guy that he's going to figure it out. He's led the league in hits numerous times. He probably could have done it last year if he didn't have the knee injury. Like, this is a guy that just finds ways to put the ball in play in a unique fashion to right field, right? He always likes to push the ball that way. And we're seeing that again, this past Homestead, he's really kind of put a better spin on the ball. Yeah, he's had a couple tough at bats, but I think the off day that he has today, Thursday, the off day he's going to have Thursday, just looking at the future, like, this is a guy who just he figures it out. He's not a guy that's ever sat back. You look at his career stats, he's always been a guy putting the ball in play. Is he doing it right now? No. And maybe will he figure it out in San Diego? Who knows, right? But it's a guy that, in the first little sample size, I wouldn't throw too much caution to the wind.
And I think that in general, I always fear teams where it's just like you have a bunch of stars on the team who it's not like, so for example, like Xander Bogaerts has been a problem for the Padres, but there's some concerning things there. I do fear the Blue Jays lineup in a lot of ways because it feels like, hilariously enough, and I didn't know this until now, Justin Turner seems to have been the best offensive player for the team. Our old buddy from LA.
Right now, in the league.
Yeah, I know. He's been 193 WRC plus right now. I can't stand this guy. He's like the cockroach. You know what I mean? He just never goes away. He keeps getting these 1-year deals. He's a little bit of like that Nelson Cruz vibe where everyone was like, okay, this is the year, right? Oh, no. This is the year. No, this is the. So hilariously enough, it'll happen when like the Padres sign him. Then he'll finally fall off the same way Nelson Cruz did, for example. But yeah, man, I just think that this team, there's just so much talent still there. You know what I mean? And it seems like their top end talent hasn't performed yet. And while I do understand 100%. That there's a lot of other, storylines in the American League East right now, the Blue Jays are getting stuff from role players that they didn't necessarily expect. Daniel Vogelbach is at least doing things. He's got a high on base percentage.
Walks a lot. He just walks all the time. So last year the Blue Jays didn't have like a pinch hit guy who can hit from the left side. They really didn't have that. And so this season, heading into spring training, like, it's one of the reasons they signed Joey Votto. They had another prospect in Spencer Horowitz who was fighting with Vogelbach to be like that guy on the bench. And so he hasn't really played that much. But when you look at this team, basically there's a couple bench guys in Ernie Clement, who used to be with Oakland there, and Davis Schneider, who had a fantastic showing at the end of last season, who was like the storybook of like drafted late in the rounds, grinded his way, almost quit, and then figured it out, and then goes and debuts in Boston and has a record-setting weekend in RBIs, right? Like, they're seeing production from some of these guys that is kind of outshining the top of the lineup, which is in a sense a good way because it means you have enough depth going through. But in another way, it's like, oh, well, you can imagine if, like you said, Bichette was putting the ball in play more with the slug. Like, what if Guerrero Jr. was not swinging at silly pitches and putting the ball in play more? So there's definitely a lot of unlocked potential. I think that's really there. And kind of one of the things you've mentioned is the storylines in the AL East. And what's interesting is that for the Blue Jays fan base, for over the past 4 years, like, historically, Toronto has been a tough market to get players to, right? Like, back in the day, Roger Clemens, that was a big sign. Like, that's a big sign, right? Like, back in the 90s there. Russell Martin in the mid 2010s, but he was Canadian. So there's like, okay, a little bit of connection. But then starting with Ryu and then Gausman, Springer, Bassett, all these guys, like, this past offseason, Blue Jays fans didn't see that, right? The biggest offensive weapon signing was Turner, and a lot of fans, after how the Blue Jays finished kind of in the middle of the pack offensively last year, like, they were like, there's got to be more, right? Like, you got JD Martinez out there, Jorge Soler, like, you got so many guys who can, bat first type of people. And it's like the first thing they did was I think bring back Kiermaier, and everyone's like, okay, defensively we like him, nice, and then it was Isaiah Carroll Falefa, and it was like he's got like a career 85 like OPS plus, and they're like, okay, even though he's currently batting well too, so okay. And then Turner, it's like, this is a signing that the team needed for offense, but it's like, what else? Like, you've, for the past 4 years, you've given us a high profile signing, and we're going to stop at Turner. And then basically the front office came out and said, we're going to add some coaches, and we believe that our offense can find it internally. And everyone was like, like, that is not good enough for the AL East, where Baltimore Orioles just traded for Corbin Burns, and the New York Yankees just traded for Verdugo and Juan Soto, and the Boston Red Sox got Tyler O'Neill. Like, that's not good enough, right? I think, especially since how the start of the season got really rough with the bats, to see players like Turner and Kiner Falefa producing, and the Clements and the Schneiders, and even Dalton Varsho, he started off really rough. In the past 3 days, I think he's had like 2 or 3 home runs. He had 2 today. Like, he's starting to swing a hot bat too. And for a team over last season who was really like, making strides with their pitching, to not have the bats produce like is just kind of not good enough. And to see them kind of put the ball and play more, to have the guy that was supposed to be the offensive weapon do exactly what he's doing is positive, right? It's a lot of good things. Now you just need to back it up with why you didn't sign the big guys in the offseason. Your internal production needs to happen. And it's swings and misses, right? But again, if you look at the top of the line, at the Springer, the Bichette, the Guerrero, like there's still more to come, right? And until that comes, they're going to be towards the bottom of the division.
Yeah, and I guess that the silver lining would be, hey, some of our role players like Kevin Gausman, we didn't even talk about him, Justin Turner, if as long as you get the big stars to show up, then you at least have one piece of the puzzle down. And not to mention, they've had a weirdly bad start to the season for Kevin Gausman as another star on this team who's been phenomenal, but not so far this year, it seems. And we're going to talk about
today
him.
Was his best one, yeah.
We're going to talk about him in a little bit, as well as some of the rest of the pitching matchups, and any other little tidbits we may have missed. But before we do that, guys, I just want to take a second to talk to you about another betting adjacent thing. But this time, I want to talk about the number one fantasy sports app in America, not necessarily Canada, but still, that's where my podcast is based. So shouts to America, you know what I mean? But no, with more than 3 million members, it is the easiest and most exciting way to get on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. So check it out. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Look, if you want, we're talking baseball, but guess what? The play-in's happening right now. Maybe you bet on, at the time of this recording, I'm curious who's winning here. Oh, wow. It's a close 3-point game between the Sixers and Heat. I wonder how that ends up. But you can bet on that. You can go on Embiid. You can go on all those guys. Jokic assists. Frankly, you could go on anything for Jokic and you'll probably hit the over. That's just how good he is. And then for baseball, what I also like about PrizePicks is they have like injury insurance. So, for example, in baseball, if they have 2 or less plate appearances, they have to get taken out, then you won't like receive any negative for that. So that's really cool. With PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into just $100 with just a very few taps. You can check that out, guys. Go. And also plenty of promotions, like all the time. That's like PrizePicks' thing. They love putting out promotions and deals every 5 seconds. So go check it out. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Remember, that is Locked On MLB. Just download the app for that $100 deposit match. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. And just like that, everybody, we're back here in the waning moments of the Locked On Padres podcast. I am Javier. This is Tyson over here. We're talking Blue Jays Padres. Let's talk a little bit about the pitching matchups. We were about to get into that before, and we'll let you wax poetic or not poetic about Kevin Gausman. But Friday's game, the expected starters are Yariel Rodriguez and Matt Waldron. Matt Waldron for the Padres has been low-key, like actually pretty solid, 3.14 ERA, considering he's the back-end starter for a team that's not exactly known for depth, and they just lost Blake Snell, for example, and people might have talked about that once or twice already. But interesting knuckleball pitcher who's very unpredictable. We'll see how he fares with a team that feels like one of these days their offense might explode. We'll see. So I'm a little bit worried about that one. What can you tell us about Yariel Rodriguez, though?
Yeah, you're going to really see an interesting guy. He got called up last week. So this offseason, for those who don't know, Rodriguez used to pitch in Japan. And last season, he didn't pitch at all except for in the World Baseball Classic, where he did really well for Team Cuba. But he didn't become a eligible free agent till the offseason. So he didn't actually pitch competitively last year outside of the World Baseball Classic. But in terms of him, he went down to AAA. He had a couple good starts under his belt. Throws mid-90s as a wicked slider when he locates it. You're not going to see him for very long. I doubt he's probably going to go past 75 pitches. That kind of is pushing it. So what you're likely going to see is a good mix. You're going to see Rodriguez start, probably go about 3 to 5 innings. And then you're going to see Bowden Francis follow him, who's had a bit of a rough go, but he's always a guy that can give them depth, and he's worked really well out of the relief position. So when he's got to go a couple innings, so definitely really going to be interesting to see Rodriguez. This is his second big league start of his career, and he did really well in his first one.
So that'll be interesting, and I'll tell you. And I do feel like every fan base says this, but so I can't vouch for if it's like unique to the Padres, but the Padres are very good at making young guys who are unproven look quite good. And I do have some merit to it. Famously, a couple years back in their famous collapse season, when I always blank on the name, for the Arizona Diamondbacks, was literally making his first career start. And he no-hit the Padres. Yeah, see, Tyson even knows.
I remember that. I don't know who the guys. I can't remember his name either, but I do remember that. Yeah. You're lucky though, because he's 27 and he pitched competitively in Cuba for like 6 years.
Oh, that's good.
And in Japan for 3. So maybe you'll get a little bit lucky.
Yes, he's not like a prospect guy from Double A or anything like that.
No, this is good. He went to Triple A, got 2 starts under his belt, but he didn't allow. I think he allowed 1 hit through like 6 innings against the Red Sox Triple A farm system both times or something like that. So and then he came up and he handled the Rockies pretty well. The only thing I think he did is he left a slider hanging, and they got a solo home run off him.
Hate to see it, man. Hate to see it. We will see how the rest of that goes, though. But in terms of what's it called? In terms of the rest of this series and the Saturday game, we don't know for sure, at least on the Padres side, who the starter will be. By the time people are listening to this episode, I will have talked about it already. But Yu Darvish heading to the IL. The team recalled Logan Gillespie from the minors, so we'll see if he gets the start. I'm going to assume it's going to be some sort of bullpen day type of game for the Padres. That just tends to be what happens. Maybe you'll see a little bit of Adrian Morejon thrown in there. Maybe Gillespie. We'll have to see. That's totally up in the air. And again, I don't know for sure. We'll have to see how that transpires. For the Blue Jays, I'm not totally sure what they'll be throwing out either. But that's the thing. I guess we'll have to see how that pans out. And then the last series I want to talk about Sunday: Chris Bassett and Joe Musgrove. What can you tell us about Bassett? Because Bassett is he's just kind of hanging in there. You know what I mean? He's just kind of been around for what feels like a while. What's going on with Chris?
Yeah, so actually one thing I'll backtrack a little bit. So if Saturday, you're probably going to see Jose Berrios, who's
my fantastic. My guy. Yeah, and let me tell you, hey, if there's it's different player, Bogarts and Berrios, but once upon a time, I think it was not this past season, but the season before, Berrios looked like this guy's going to be, in a different league. Like he'll have to go to Japan, the KBO, whatever it is, the Mexican. He was getting killed, and thankfully, as all Puerto Ricans do, like myself, he perseveres, and he came back, and he's been really, really solid. So Jose Berrios, not an easy start whatsoever.
He's not getting enough love on any of the Cy Young things right now. Like he's just been dominant. And so back to your original question, Bassett. So Bassett's such an interesting guy. He's kind of that guy. He doesn't overpower you, but he tricks you, right? Because he's got 8 different pitches that he can do. He tends to wear the pitch calm. It's funny when you watch him pitch. For example, with Alejandro Kirk will call a pitch and he'll just be there like, nah. Like he'll be on the mound. You'll hear him be like, no. And then he'll go to his belt and be like, I'm throwing this one. And then boom, throws it down. So he's such an interesting guy. He did get hit hard a few times. The first few starts, like he just wasn't really locating that well. He was leaving them pretty over the plate. His last start though, he really honed in. He didn't struggle. He didn't leave them over the plate. He was really mixing it up well. The thing with Bassett that you're going to expect is if he's on his game, he's 100 pitchers, 6+ innings. Like that's expected of him. He hit 200 innings last year. He's just got a good
workhorse.
And it's great because he throws like a low 90s fastball. And then what he'll do is he'll throw like a 70 to 69 mile per hour curveball. And some guys are just like, wow. And then he comes at you with like a slide. Like it's just, he throws and then he mixes it up. He throws something but it's interesting to watch him because he's just on the mound. He's got a game plan. And if Kirk's not aligned with him, he just goes, yep, I'm going to take the reins now. Keeps going. So it'll be interesting to see how he comes back after his last start with how good he was. And just, the first few not going his way and now having one good one under his belt. So,
hey, what can I say? Chris Bassett. Kind of like, do you know those memes that are like the Chad innings thrower meme, where it's like
Oh,
have you ever seen those? Because
yeah.
Chris Bassett is a good example. For those who don't know, it's just like this fun dichotomy where it's like these superstars who throw 100, but then they get burned out, as we've seen, especially in baseball as of late. And then they're like,
Yeah.
hey, you know what? I'll take the guy who throws 180 innings every year and just consistently just keeps you in a ball game. You know what I mean? Hey, maybe that'll become a new topic of debate among baseball fans. In terms of the Padres, Joe Musgrove, we'll see how he pans out. Really up and down season for him so far. I think he'll be fine, but we'll have to see how that all pans out. Tyson,
Blue Jays prospect.
I know. I was actually thinking of bringing that up, but what I do want to ask you before we get out of here, any final players, things you think that Padres fans should look out for from this Blue Jays team?
Yeah, I think one real interesting player to watch is Dalton Varsho. He's always been known for his elite glove in the outfield, makes diving plays. He's got such good speed and range out there. He's really swinging a hot bat this last series, so it'll be interesting to see if he can carry that over. He likes the high heat, so depending on who you have, if you got a knuckleballer out there, that might benefit Blue Jays a little bit. But they also like to tend to free swing a little, so it'll be interesting to see. And then the other one is Davis Schneider. If the Blue Jays fan base has a fan favorite, it is that guy. He has one of the best mustaches in the league, and he just, I think statistically, what are they? Because he doesn't usually play against. He wasn't playing against right-handed pitching to start the year, but now he's kind of like worked his way in. I think the Jays are like 8-2 when he starts, and they just lose every other game that he's not in. So it'll be interesting to see how he is, and then. For the bullpen, Jimmy Garcia has just been absolutely lights out. That dude is throwing on all cylinders this year, and he's a big reason why the Blue Jays have won some baseball games. So definitely, I think if you're looking at three guys to keep an eye on outside of the Springer, the Bichettes, and the Guerreros, like those three are the ones to keep an eye on.
We will see. Indeed, you also have a Richards on your team.
Trevor,
I only say that because the Padres had Garrett Richards not too long ago. So shouts to Garrett Richards. I don't know why I just thought of that just now.
We
just wanted to
even
give him
traded for Clayton Richard from you guys a long time ago. I think
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that one. Shouts to that. Look,
he did not do well.
No,
nice guy, but he struggled a bit. Yeah.
Hey, we didn't even talk about that. That might be for another time. But just is the explanation behind the Blue Jays right now that it just seems to have not hit on too many trades of late. Maybe that's what it is. Gabriel Marino, I feel bad about, who's in our division now that we have to deal with. So that'll be my final thing. Now. I know.
Doing better.
I know he is. He is doing better. But I want to give a shout and just say, Major League Baseball, I've had enough. Stop letting every other team in the division get better. I know you can't really stop the Dodgers, but can you do something about Arizona? San Francisco, you're just gonna let them get everybody? Enough. We already have enough to deal with.
Jordan Montgomery's starting soon, I think, too.
Yeah, I think he is. Yeah, probably just him and Eduardo will be back just in time to face the Padres, I'm sure. But Tyson, this has been a blast. As always, do you have any final things you'd like to plug for the good people out there?
No, I just appreciate you having me on.
Wow, just straight to the point. I love that. I love it very much. Gotta respect it.
There,
the Twitter handle's there at Tyson_MLB. You can find me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. And you can find both of us over at justbaseball.com, a very, very, very good website, in my humble, unbiased opinion. You can check that out, as well as check out my other show, Baseball versus the World, which just launched. You can check that out as well. Good vibes all around, man. Until next time, everybody. Next episode, we're going to be doing... So this will be Friday. So we'll be recapping the series Monday. I'll also be talking with Armley and another person of Just Baseball about the Merrill Madness and a little bit of Padres farm system update and whatever else happens, because things are happening. Baseball's in full swing, and we got you covered. But until next time, stay faithful, my Friar Faithful homies, and stay safe. Take care.